Hi, and welcome back to Military Law Talks. So today's video is about Admiral Burke. So he is a recently retired four-star Navy admiral who was recently convicted in federal district court. So if you haven't seen my recent video about government ethics, I encourage you watch that video, pause this video right now, go watch that previous video. It'll help you understand the ethical rules that will make this case make a little bit more sense if you understand the rules that Admiral Burke was supposed to follow and that he was recently convicted of violating. So here is Admiral Burke. So he was a four-star Navy admiral in the European, like African theater. So he was actually in charge of like all Navy military members and civilians in Europe and Africa and like that whole area. And so he knew he was retiring and he was in talks with contractors. And so these contractors had this company that they did, I think it was leadership training, but it was essentially training that they provided to the Navy. And so they had a previous contract with the Navy that ended up getting canceled. And they were told, these contractors who own this company, not to have any contact with Admiral Burke. Not really sure on the details of that, but later, couple years later, Admiral Burke knew he was retiring, so he entered into negotiations with this defense contractor to get a position after he retired. And so unfortunately, we know that this is pretty common. So that's kind of a revolving door among DoD senior leaders that after they retire and leave the DoD, they go work for some government contractor. And so there's rules in place that say if you are in potential employment talks with a government contractor, you have to recuse yourself and disqualify yourself from any official actions on that contract prior to actually like leaving the DoD. So while you're still in the DoD, if you are negotiating employment with a contractor, though that contractor's financial interests are imputed to the employee. And I explained all this in that earlier video. And so he didn't do that. He actually didn't disclose to the Navy that he was in employment discussions. As a four-star admiral, he actually had to file public financial disclosure statements every year. He did not disclose on that form that he was in contract negotiations for employment, post-government employment. And so he didn't report that. Then he did end up getting a job after he retired with that defense contractor that provided that leadership training. It was, I believe, a very high position because he's getting paid $500,000 a year. And in his last couple of years as a DoD employee, what he did as a rear admiral, right? He makes the final decision on a lot of contracts. And so he steered a contract to this company, this training contract. It wasn't actually valued at a whole lot. It was like just a little over $300,000 contract, but there was talks about even larger contracts, like multi-million or in the millions of dollars, seven-figure contracts, that Burke kind of was in this conspiracy with these defense contractors to steer that contract. And so this all came out right after he retired. He was indicted last year under the Biden administration. And so it was the Biden Justice Department that actually indicted him. At the time, he is the highest ranking military officer to be indicted on charges like this, bribery charges, and other charges. And then when the new Trump administration took over, Admiral Burke, actually, his attorney, surprisingly enough, actually used to represent Pete Hegseth in a totally unrelated earlier matter. So felt like maybe I have this in with the Trump Justice Department and filed a motion to dismiss the charges, asking, like, hey, kind of new regime, dismiss the charges. Well, that didn't happen. So the charges didn't get dismissed. And so it went to trial. There was actually a jury trial. It was a fully contested case. Um, Admiral Burke actually maintained his innocence throughout. Same thing with the fellow contractors that he was charged with. They all maintained their innocence. And they actually had like a recent piece, I believe it was in military.com, about kind of pleading their innocence and trying to get public opinion on their side. But it went to trial. And after a 5-day jury trial, Burke was found guilty of conspiracy to commit bribery, performing acts affecting a personal financial interest, and concealing material facts from the United States. And so he was found guilty, and he'll be sentenced later this summer on August 22nd, 2025, unless the case gets delayed. But that's what it's currently scheduled for. And so just a quote from the U.S. Attorney for the D.C. District. Now it's former Judge Janine Pirro. She is the acting Attorney General for the D.C. area. Because the previous appointee did not get confirmed in time. And so we'll see who will get appointed, after that. But she is currently the acting U.S. attorney. And so her quote, "When you abuse your position and betray public trust to line your own pockets, it undermines the confidence in government you represent. Our office with law enforcement partners will root out corruption, be it bribes or illegal contracts, and hold accountable the perpetrators, no matter what rank or title they hold." And so, like I said, this is the highest ranking military officer to ever be found, to even be charged, but not let alone found guilty on this sort of contract scheme. And so it goes on to quote and say, Burke tarnished his reputation and position as a 4-star admiral by steering a lucrative contract towards a government vendor in exchange for future employment. So that's the facts that I just laid out. Today's verdict shows that no one is above the law. The FBI and our federal law enforcement partners remain committed to exposing fraud in the government and bringing corrupt officials to justice for abusing their positions of power. And then, like I said, the article goes, this is actually a press release from the DOJ, but it goes on to explain the charges like I just laid out. And so this is a significant case, particularly for the military. The Navy in particular has kind of, unfortunately, a storied history of having corruption within their officer corps with government contractors. And so if you've never heard of the Fat Leonard case, it was a kind of a long-running scheme where this government contractor in the Pacific would essentially bribe, right? They're bribes, they're not gifts. A bunch of Navy officers with lavish gifts, parties when they would come into port. Prostitutes were at those parties. There were lots of drugs. There's a lot of, gifts like watches and vacations and even cash money. And the whole reason, right? I mean, it's a bribe, of course. What they call Fat Leonard, but this government contractor, what he wanted in exchange is contracts, right? He wanted to ensure that, his company provided like porter services when the ship would come into port, cleaning the ship. And so he wanted to ensure that he would get these lucrative contracts. And he even convinced some officers to give him classified information about ship movements, where they're at, when they were going to be in port. And this is a long running scheme. So like I said, unfortunately, the Navy has been embroiled in these sort of ethical, failings, these moral failings of their officer corps. And so Burke is just now the highest ranking person. And so I'll probably do a later series on the whole Fat Leonard's saga. There was a whole lot of court martials, federal charges, several Navy officers were charged criminally in federal criminal court. But it embroiled Navy officers and even ones that didn't do anything wrong, but they were just caught up in the investigation. It delayed a lot of promotions. It delayed, really, it had a huge impact on Navy readiness and the officer corps and like putting them in positions, moving them from place to place. And so it was a huge impact and definitely didn't make the Navy look really good in the public's opinion. And so Burke is kind of, unfortunately, the one of the Navy officers who have this just can't follow the ethical rules, probably didn't listen to his lawyers, probably didn't get advice from his lawyers, right? He hid information from the Navy, which leads me to believe he knew what he was doing. He knew it violated the rules, but that's what happened. We'll see. We'll be following this case and we'll see what he gets sentenced with. But yeah, hopefully you watched that previous video on the ethical requirements, ethics in 10. And if you haven't watched that video, make sure you watch that video. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do so. Make sure you like and share this video out there. And if you have any comments or your own stories of corruption, maybe within the Navy or other military branches, please put it in the comments below. I'm always interested to hear about your own experiences, and I'll catch it in the next video.